Welcome to Science Hub. My name is Marian Bănică, and today we are going to talk about mastering cybersecurity and protecting critical infrastructure in the digital age. Our guest is Alexandru Georgescu. He is a senior expert in Department of Cybersecurity and Critical Infrastructure Protection at the National Institute of Research and Development in Informatics, or even, short, this is ICI Bucharest. Good to see you, Alexandru.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Let's move on in the digital age and discuss about a bit your background. It includes a lot of projects that are related to technology, most of them or all of them. And we want to know more about the new trends and new technology and emerging technologies that are right now like buzzwords. And most of our visitors, they don't know about these terms and what they do. So I would like you to tell us for the beginning, what do you think everyone should know about blockchain technologies?
Blockchain is one of the most promising new technologies or emerging technologies that can revolutionize various fields. So blockchain or distributed ledger technology appeared more than 10 years ago, and it's about a new system of distributing information in such a way that you do not need a central authority or an intermediary in order to ensure the integrity of that information. So usually when you have, for instance, if we have multiple units of information, multiple areas of accounting, we need to have a ledger, a central ledger, a database where we have that information. Blockchain makes it possible to not have that corruptible central authority because it distributes copies of the same ledger to multiple people in a very wide network, and it uses various algorithms to ensure the integrity of that information for all of them, and the fact that somebody cannot fake some of that data, modify it, or even attribute something to himself that he shouldn't. So blockchain allows for trust in an anonymous circumstance where you do not have an intermediary, you only have a network. It allows you to trust that the data that you are seeing is real, that if you engage with the blockchain, the data will have integrity, it will have confidentiality, and this makes new applications possible with a lower amount of risk, with lower costs, and with lower efforts. And blockchain is beginning to be applied in a wide array of systems, even though, of course, there are a lot of issues still to handle regarding, for instance, the regulation of blockchain, especially the regulation of blockchain in the financial sector, and how the authorities themselves can pursue legitimate interests regarding the identification of criminals, the prevention of fraud, of tax evasion, of terrorist financing, and more.
Mm-hmm. Can you please explain us what is the difference between, let's say, a database and a database that is using blockchain?
So basically, a database, maybe you can copy it in multiple areas, but when you modify a database, you modify just that database. Mm-hmm. But a blockchain represents, let's say, 1,000 databases or 1,000,000 databases. All of them are the same, and through special algorithms, people usually refer to the proof of work algorithm, which uses very difficult equations to solve in order to ensure the integrity of the network. So you use these equations in order to ensure that all of the databases remain up to date at the same time. So if I try to modify one database, all of them are changed, and if I try illegally to alter one of the databases, the network rejects it. So instead of having one database that is the real and the original database, you have 1,000 that are all kept up to date, and that ensures that you cannot let's say, corrupt, or you cannot illegally change one of them, because automatically the others would reject it.
Yeah, one of the most known application of the blockchain is the crypto in general, but this is another story that we are going to discuss. Tell me what, financial industry is one of the most proeminent, let's say, user of the blockchain. What other industries can you tell us that they have application in blockchain technology?
Of course, the initial application for blockchain when it appeared and Bitcoin was launched as the first application was the logical application of blockchain in the area of finance. So you have, let's say, coins or accounts, and you are trying to maintain the integrity of an account and of a payment system. But you have other applications as well. Blockchain is being used for identity management. It's being used in tracing the origin of goods through logistical systems. It's being used to secure records related to healthcare. It's being used to secure voting systems. More and more, it's being used for digital rights as well. It is also being used in various, let's say, exotic ways, for instance, decentralized markets. So markets which are not located on a particular server belonging to a particular institution or company. You can have markets running through the blockchain itself. So, and many, many more, because we are still in the beginning of the, let's say, blockchain revolution, and the various programmers and this very wide community that is always sharing ideas on how to improve blockchain applications is figuring out more and more applications each day. One of the most promising applications that has actually appeared is that of smart contracts as a tool, and the smart contracts can be applied to everything from finance to insurance, to healthcare, and more.
Yeah, let's discuss a bit about smart contracts. Can you tell me what is the difference between a normal contract and a smart contract, and how blockchain is used basically?
The smart contract, so the difference between a normal contract and a smart contract that uses blockchain is the fact that the smart contract can run itself. It doesn't need a central authority to run it. So, for instance, in the past, you'd use the bank as an intermediary for a transaction. You, for instance, you put some money in escrow in the bank so that the other person can see that you have the money, and then when you deliver something to that other person, when that person delivers something to you, then you notify the bank and it releases the money to that person, and you pay the bank for the service itself. With a smart contract, that can run on its own. And you can also, of course, if it concerns real goods, maybe you would still have some sort of third party, but not the one handling the money, in order to ensure the quality of the goods. But other aspects of it can be fully automated. For instance, we can have a smart contract where we all bet on the result of a football match, and depending on what happens in that football match, the program itself can take the results and automatically disperse the money as it was decided, without us having to use the services of a trusted third party to actually hold the money and disperse it.
So basically it's a contract where that brings other services inside of the contract, and you don't need anymore to, so basically it's going to be used not like a normal document that is basically just a document, Word or whatever. And so basically it's also actions that automated actions on the contract. Yeah.
To the extent that they can be automated and done specifically by computers with the modification of databases or with taking information from online, almost anything can be automated and turned into a smart contract. Yeah. Only the interface with the physical world, let's say, would still require some sort of input. But otherwise, you can run the smart contracts on their own.
There are applications that we can use. Do you know any application or some application that you can tell us that we can use smart contracts?
Definitely, you can use. you can use smart contracts in built on various existing cryptocurrencies or tokens. For instance, Ethereum is the most used, but I think most blockchain applications in the future will actually be in the back office of the services that we use. For instance, DHL, the courier delivery company, it's already using blockchain services as part of its logistics management. Traceability for fair growth cocoa or coffee or other raw materials that do not utilize, let's say, slave labor or child labor, or have a certain, let's say, bio or organic qualities, that can also be traced with blockchain. You don't actually know that you are using blockchain, but you can do that. Or for instance, you can buy insurance from somebody. That can be done through blockchain. There are usually people who use smart contracts on their own. Right now, because the industry is just starting, are the people who actually program the smart contracts. There isn't yet a place where you can go and say, I just want a smart contract for this. Somebody else is already using it in relation to you as a client or the various parts of the business.
But in my ERP, there is a function that is said there, you can use smart contracts. Basically, if after I'm doing the contract, everything is connected with my bank account, with emails and so on, and I don't have to do nothing because everything is done by the ERP application, basically.
Definitely, I've used smart contracts as well. For instance, when I was experimenting with initial coin offerings, and I was trying to have, like, we were 100 people who wanted to get the minimum investment for initial coin offering, so we made a smart contract to pool all of our funds together and then get the coins. So we've done that, but the key is which applications are the ones that the normal person will actually interact with. There won't be that many of them, except if you discount, for instance, cryptocurrencies themselves, if they want to have them or speculate them or use them. But when it comes to non-financial applications for blockchains, many of them will be invisible to the average user. You will go to the airport. This is an application that is already being used. You'll go to the airport and they will check your ID, for instance, at your ticket at the
entrance.
No, at the duty-free store. And in order for them not to see your personal data, they will use a blockchain application to ensure that you are who you say you are, without somebody actually having to physically compare the data, for instance, in your passport or on your ticket, with what is being shown on a screen. And this is already being done.
Oh, quite nice. I mean, to not share my location or my residency with
exactly, and he doesn't have to see it. A person doesn't have to see. For instance, now blockchain is also being used more and more to establish certain credentials. For instance, you have a PhD in something, or you have some sort of degree or certificate. You can use blockchain applications to validate that exists and is legitimate without actually having to see the degree and seeing, for instance, the address that is written there, or the birth date, or your social security number that identifies you.
So a lot of reduction of the paper.
Hopefully, yes.
So,
although I will note that paperwork and bureaucracy is often a function of human organizations, not necessarily of the processes required to actually deliver the service.
Good point. Very good point, and I'm happy that you said this. Tell me, what are the limitations at this moment that you know about using or adoption of the blockchain technology?
Firstly, the limitations should be related to the regulation itself, because there are compelling interests on behalf of the state or other organizations regarding the safe and legitimate use of blockchain. We've seen a wave of regulation, for instance, in the financial sector when it comes to the trading of cryptocurrencies, specifically because they introduced Know Your Customer regulations, specifically because of the use in tax evasion, tax fraud, terrorist financing, monitoring criminal organizations and so on. So this is one issue. How do we regulate it properly? Secondly, there is still, just like any technology, there is initially only the people with a high level of technical skill or a passion for this are the main users. We still have to make blockchain friendly for other users as well. Thirdly, I would state that there needs to be a transformation in how companies also consider using or developing their processes and services, because they have to want to integrate blockchain into their activities. I don't mean the issue where some entities, some vendors might accept payment in Bitcoin or something else. I'm referring exactly to the idea of them recognizing that blockchain brings value and having the know-how or the confidence to actually integrate a blockchain tool. And if you are in an area where you also have insurance issues, because you need insurance for your activity, then whether the insurance company views blockchain as a technology that you can use without driving up your premium also matters. I will note, for instance, that now a series of blockchain startups are actually using blockchain for tracking in the airline industry, for tracking the maintenance and repairs of aircraft, which is something very important. We've seen on TV what the neglect of maintenance can do in the recent period. So that is a proof of trust in the blockchain technology. And the last thing that I will point out is the fact that many of the blockchain applications are also in public services or government, related, of course, to the reduction of bureaucracy or the provisioning of services. My own institute, for instance, wants to develop applications based on blockchain for government use. We launched for cultural use an NFT, an institutional NFT trading service, so non-fungible tokens, initially for art and for cultural promotion, but those same NFTs, the infrastructure behind them can be used for birth certificates, for property rights, for all sorts of other certificates. For intellectual
property.
Exactly, for degrees and so on. But the point is that the authorities have to want to use blockchain services. So we are still discussing the digitalization of public services in Romania and in many other countries. It is another step to go to the introduction of blockchain in public services.
But on the other side, there are also countries like Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, also some parts of other countries, Singapore and so on, that are already using blockchain and with quite good results already.
Definitely, but I would point out that all of these countries that you mentioned, one, are very small. Two, because they are smaller and they have lower populations, they have less distance between the government and the private sector in general. It's a lot easier for them to meet. It's a lot easier for them to exchange ideas and to actually, let's say, configure and debug these sorts of systems. When you are talking about 15, 20 million, 100 million people, or multiple, let's say, administrative units in the same country, even multiple states in a federation, it becomes harder and harder to try to reform administratively such systems in order to include new technologies, because of course organizations have their own priorities, their own thought on these issues. You have a lot of stakeholders, some of them might be against it. Think about how difficult it has been in Romania to create the let's say the single page for citizen access to government services online.
Yeah, on the other side, there are countries like Estonia, as I told you, that they already did this for 25 years already.
They are a leader in this, yes,
okay.
yes.
Let's move on to a subject that you have a lot of experience, and it's about cyber diplomacy.
Yes, in my institute there is, I study geopolitics as well, but in ICI Bucharest we have a new center for cyber diplomacy. It has become a priority effort for us in order to create partnerships abroad with like-minded entities and public authorities, for instance, in the United States, in Europe of course, but in the Middle East, in East Asia, in Southeast Asia, we have partnerships in multiple countries. And cyber diplomacy is emerging as an area of great interest to us because of the digitalization of the world, in which most entities are sovereign states. This means that you need to have a coordination in order to address the challenges posed by digitalization. So, for instance, the challenge of cybercrime, the challenge of cyber terrorism, cyber warfare, standards, technical standards, or how do we run together the infrastructure, basically the basic infrastructure of the internet that keeps the so-called World Wide Web functioning, where you have non-profits like the Internet Engineering Task Force or other entities, the International Standards Organization. All of these are examples of cyber diplomacy because entities that cannot give orders to each other need to coordinate to achieve something related to the public good. And because now cyber has never stopped at your borders, you need to interact with these people, you need to coordinate, and diplomacy is no longer just for diplomats, it's also for companies, for the engineers and the programmers that work on these issues, for the various experts in these areas. And you see a similar phenomenon happening on regulatory areas. So if you are discussing like healthcare or stuff like that, you see also more and more diplomacy there. You see science diplomacy, you see military diplomacy. And cyber diplomacy is another cross-cutting issue that is of great importance.
Yeah, military diplomacy, it sounds a bit interesting.
Definitely. Think about all of the exercises that various countries do together, how they share information, how they try to develop new products together, new weapon systems.
Can you tell us how diplomatic efforts effectively mitigate the risks of cyber attack?
Cyber attacks are an important, one of the most visible issues that people contend with, in addition to cybercrime, because you can have cyber attacks from a criminal or cyber attacks from somebody who has a geopolitical interest, either a state or a proxy entity controlled or financed by a state or some ideological actor. And people are afraid of this because since we are more and more reliant on digital systems, we are also more vulnerable to cyber attacks, whether they want to extract money from us or secrets or disrupt our activities. And we have seen that more and more of these cyber attacks, they come from, to the extent that we can actually track them and attribute them, they come from the territory of other states. So you need to be able to, one, identify and pursue the cyber attackers and cooperate internationally, cross-border, different police forces or military forces. Secondly, we also need to discourage these attacks. Again, something that cyber diplomacy can work with. Look at the fact that a part of the cyber diplomacy toolbox of the European Union is the cyber deterrence measures and the cyber sanctions measures that the European Union can apply. And it took years to develop this toolbox and to get everybody to agree that yes, this is what we will do when it comes to Russia, when it comes to other entities that attack us. And also, after you have this police action, after you have this cyber deterrence, you also need to consider cyber cooperation. Because if I get attacked and I learn something about an attacker or about the vulnerability of my systems, this can also be used by somebody else. And a lot of the times countries or companies, they don't really want to cooperate because it means recognizing, admitting that you have been attacked and sharing the information about how you got attacked, how much you lost. And you need cyber diplomacy to create the possibility and the trust for these sorts of transfers of information. And that way I can learn that if an American company got attacked, they used some sort of vulnerability in their operating system, I can also do it on my own. I can take that information and notify the companies in Romania, or if I am, for instance, an industry association, I can say, look, somebody in our industry got attacked through this particular way, and we can also increase our resilience to cyber attacks, because most cyber attackers, they're not geniuses. This is one of the problems we have today. Cyber attacks are becoming more and more frequent because the barrier to the knowledge to implement cyber attacks has gone down. I'm not a technical person, but I'm not a programmer, but I can go online and buy malware. I can go online and buy a distributed denial of service attack against a website. I just need to pay for it. I don't need to set it up myself.
Yeah.
So anybody can do it now.
Yeah, I told you before starting the this talk that I studied computer science, and the worst homeworks I did, basically they were considered like malware by the antivirus system. So you don't have to be a genius in order to create something that your system or other system do not work at all.
And attackers, for instance, they reuse vulnerabilities, they reuse malware, they reuse tools and methods. They leave a lot of traces. The big problem is that either government entities or private companies or various other entities, because of reputational and liability issues, they don't actually want to admit or to give that they've been attacked or to give access to information. So you need to establish the trust. It's easy for you as a government to order companies in your state to comply with this or that regulation, although it's better for them to do it not because you force them, but because they want to. But what do you do when you have a multinational company or something happened to a company in another country? Then you need diplomacy, or you need diplomacy to have built the structures that you need for cooperation.
Yeah, quite nice. There are a lot of discussion on regulations in this topic. What do you consider, or what you can tell us about cyber diplomacy efforts in this area?
In which area exactly?
In cyber attacks, in establishing trust cooperation between different entities.
Basically, as part of most diplomatic efforts, before you go to actually the cyber diplomacy, you have this area of confidence building measures. And it takes time, and you need to establish both similar perspectives and the willingness to create mechanisms. And I would say, for instance, that the European Union, the way in which it has institutionalized cooperation on cybersecurity, on common regulation and governance of cyber issues and of critical infrastructure protection, is a triumph of diplomacy itself. But I will point out, for instance, as an example, as part of cyber diplomacy, you have, ever since the last EU-US summit, you have had the Trade and Technology Council, and as part of the 10 working groups of that Trade and Technology Council, Cooperation Council, you have, for instance, a working group on common AI regulation, a working group on the security of the supply chain for technological systems, which often have a physical and a cyber component, the cybersecurity itself. So now the US and the EU are let's say, systematizing, formalizing cooperation on various issues, many of them related to cyber. The EU and NATO are cooperating, for instance, on cybersecurity. And this is, again, an issue that it took a long time to create this cooperation. The cooperation between the Computer Emergency Response Team of the EU and the NATO Center for Cybersecurity, which used to be NCERC. They cooperate even operationally, so they exchange information and they work together. This sort of cooperation, or you have seen over the years less successful attempts by the US and Europeans to negotiate with Russia, China, and other actors to decrease the amount of state-sponsored attacks against cyber attacks against critical infrastructure systems, which has not taken place. But it takes years, and as frameworks, you can see, for instance, both institutional cooperation mechanisms, like what I mentioned, the EU and NATO, also common regulation. You have in cybercrime a lot of UN initiatives, or for instance, the Budapest Convention from almost 20 years ago on cybercrime. You have more and more common declarations at global level against cyber attacks, especially targeting critical infrastructures. So when you think about cyber diplomacy and the regulation of cyber issues globally, this is what you are working with, either institutions working with each other or common declarations that can create in time political obligations, or common legislation, or common standards. Again, this is important, or let's say norms of behavior, where you say it's not okay to attack this sort of infrastructure, it's not okay to use this sort of method.
Yeah. Really nice, and I didn't know basically that there is also a specialty called cyber diplomacy till now. Even if I'm considering, I mean, a part of people that are specialized in this, but I thought that is something a bit more related to just regulation, to the lawyers part and not so much to the technical part, but I'm very surprised in what you said.
I wanted, if I can add something here as well. Look at what various states or entities are doing. The United States created a Cyber Diplomatic and Emerging Technology Bureau within the Department of State, and whenever they have, and many EU countries as well, EU member states have been doing this. Whenever they have a strategy for artificial intelligence, for quantum, for various security issues, you see that they include cooperation with other states, with like-minded states, especially entities that share the same values. They put cooperation there as being one of the key pillars, because you can't handle these issues on your own. And that means basically that you will have to engage in cyber diplomacy, and it's not just state to state. In the opinion of my institute, although some people use a more restrictive definition of cyber diplomacy, companies also can engage in cyber diplomacy, or states and companies engage in cyber diplomacy together. When they try, for instance, now you see that companies like BMW or industry bodies in automotive and in other areas are trying to create their own regulations and principles on the implementation of AI. They basically have to cooperate not just with regulators or with governments, but also between each other, trans-border, in order to have, let's say, a minimum level of regulation cooperation to prevent the worst of the damage, or to prevent some of the public objections. Because it's better for you to regulate yourself rather than have the state regulate you after a disaster.
Of course. Let's move on to a special chapter where you have a PhD, which is critical infrastructure. Tell us what is critical infrastructure, just to be on the same page.
So an infrastructure is a system that is made up both of assets like pipelines or power plants, but also the organizations running them. And a critical infrastructure is one such infrastructure whose destruction or disruption would cause significant loss of human life or material damage. In the West, in the United States, in Europe, in European countries, there is a framework of critical infrastructure protection already applied for over 20 years, developed to protect the critical infrastructures on which each country relies, or on which we rely collectively, so critical infrastructures affecting two or more states. And these infrastructures include energy infrastructures, healthcare infrastructures, as we saw during the pandemic, roads, ports, telecommunications, public administration, national security infrastructures, also chemical industry, nuclear industry, space, and so on. And you have legislation in place to define which areas are critical infrastructures, and to have methodologies to identify and designate critical infrastructures, because not all roads are critical to the nation or to Europe. They may be critical for a particular small town or a village, but not nationally. And because you have limited resources and limited capabilities from the intelligence services, from the Ministry of Interior, the police, you have to identify the most important ones, including the ones likeliest to be targeted by adversaries for deliberate attacks, and concentrate your resources there. So once you have identified and designated a critical infrastructure, then the operator of that critical infrastructure, 60 to 70 to 80% of which are private entities, not public entities, those operators, they have to comply with national, European, or other forms of regulation. They need to have an operator security plan. They need to invest to increase resilience. They need to report if something strange happens, or if they have suffered a cyber attack, or if they believe that something has happened that might be of interest to the state that can affect the security of their field. So this is critical infrastructure. Protection is something that has been done for over 20 years in the West, starting especially with the 9/11 attacks in the US, soon after the European Union started implementing it. And actually last year, so basically in 2023, the European Union adopted a whole new legislation on critical infrastructure protection that takes into account all of the lessons learned from Ukraine, from the pandemic, and from the various other incidents that have taken place over the years, including the campaigns of cyber attacks against European actors.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us what is the, or can we discuss a bit about the interplay between cloud computing and cybersecurity, highlighting potential challenges or and benefits?
So cloud computing is one of those technologies or buzzwords that everybody is trying to use. It's very convenient because, you can have software as a service, infrastructure as a service. You don't need to have your own...
government as a service.
Hopefully that already exists. You don't need to go looking for it.
Yes,
but, after the main players in this field, in the field of cloud computing, they can offer you for instance, the security of your information, of processes, and on demand, depending on how much computing power you need for your processes, how many clients you have. You don't need to invest overnight in your own infrastructure. You can just buy more capacity. So it's very flexible. It's very advantageous. But at the same time, you can have, for instance, various problems. If there is a debilitating cyber attack against your provider, if, for instance, you have problems related to disasters that can affect one or more data centers. Whenever you centralize a function, you solve some issues, but you create others. And we see now, even my institute, ICI Bucharest, has its own cloud infrastructure for government use. But of course, most entities use the Microsoft Azure cloud infrastructure, the Amazon cloud infrastructure, or the Google cloud infrastructure, and that provides very good services for the users. And at the same time, of course, it doesn't eliminate, but rather enhances some cybersecurity issues. For instance, regarding what happens in your own company if you have a failure where somebody loses his password or gives access to somebody who shouldn't to your part of the cloud infrastructure services.
So just to mention a bit to everybody. It's not anymore about one cloud, it's a multi-cloud and also a hybrid cloud. Can you tell us what hybrid cloud is and how do you see the use from now on of the hybrid cloud?
These alternative architectures that emerge, including the hybrid cloud where you have various systems in play working together both within your organization, company, whatever, and from outside suppliers. They're trying to address issues related to reliability, integrity of operations, predictability of operations, resilience, having as little downtime as possible. But the main thing here to point out is that whereas cloud infrastructure started to be used by, let's say, retail companies offering services to various individuals, now because cloud infrastructure has become a lot more trustworthy and also higher performance, we are seeing also companies, operators that have avoided it in the past, like energy companies, also now using cloud infrastructure. And this means that you can have both more competition and more capability, but sometimes at the cost of some new, let's say, some new types of cyber threats. One trend, for instance, that I would point out in cybersecurity that I think is relevant here is the fact that more and more entities trying to find lower costs or better capability, more efficiency, better service, are using commercial off-the-shelf hardware and software. And actually, the cloud itself can be considered a commercial off-the-shelf solution for all of your needs. And when you do that, you are actually decreasing security through obscurity. So potential hackers can already know what kind of systems you use, what kind of software, what open source libraries were used. It's not in the past. critical infrastructure operators, they would build their own operating systems, their own hardware, and it was just for them, and it was very hard for a hacker to or they were using something dedicated for a particular industry, so a normal hacker would not really know how that works. But now if everybody is using the same systems, if everybody is running their servers on Linux, or they have satellites running Android operating systems, as we are seeing today, then it becomes much easier to be targeted by a potential hacker, because he doesn't care what field you are in. The tool blocks that you use, the building blocks that you use for your business are the same, whether you are selling products online or offering financial services or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us what measures should an organization take to secure IoT devices, Internet of Things devices, in their organizations?
The Internet of Things is one of those paradigms where not necessarily emerging technologies, but let's say practices where you have, especially by using the new communication technologies such as 5G, you can integrate millions of sensors. You can integrate many devices to create new products and services in healthcare, precision agriculture, personal devices, wearables, and so on. And many entities are trying to use Internet of Things paradigms, solutions for smart cities, for improving efficiency, for reducing the impact on the environment, whatever you want. But this also comes with risks. And I think that especially any entity, but especially private entities that use Internet of Things solutions, has to keep in mind the fact that many devices are unpatched and unpatchable. If you keep them for too long, even if they are working, you are creating a vulnerability in your own system, because the key to the Internet of Things is that at some point you stop noticing that it is there. For instance, I was part of
from the software point of view or from the hardware point of view?
From the point of view of the managers of the company itself.
Of course.
For instance, I was discussing as part of a working group on construction 4.0, so the new paradigm of the construction industry involving architecture, engineering, construction, but also operation of facilities. We were discussing in this working group the fact that many entities, they forget that they have LED lighting controlled through Wi-Fi in their meeting rooms. It's not something that registers anymore, but that is actually one of the ways in which you can be hacked. So you end up using various sensors, even things for convenience, not necessarily, I'm not speaking just about the big, important industrial control systems that everybody is trying to protect, but the various ancillary systems, the smart refrigerators in the office kitchen, or the working unit at home for people who are now, this is a big problem after the pandemic, people who are working from home in critical fields and their home station is not as secured as their workstation at work, and that they have their own, let's say, maybe a smart home where everything is interconnected. That creates new vulnerabilities. And if you have a smart refrigerator, 5 years later, there have been no, maybe you haven't patched it at all, maybe there are no more patches for it, you haven't replaced it, it's still working, and that can create new vulnerabilities for you. So many times the behavior of the entity is actually the biggest risk or the biggest mitigating factor in cybersecurity. You have to invest, of course, you have to train your people, but you have to have good cybersecurity culture to know your vulnerabilities.
So you just remember me that I have to patch my fridge. Yeah, it's something very serious, and I'm quite sure that the antivirus also for smart devices is very very useful. It's something I don't want to be hacked.
Look at the fact that more and more, you see, if you look at the industry reports in this field, like the Norton Cybersecurity reports or the various other entities, you'll see that hackers are orienting themselves towards areas where the cybersecurity culture has not kept up with the actual developments in the devices and their capabilities. We had a few years ago, we saw a significant rise in cyber attacks against mobile devices because people had an antivirus at home, but they didn't have an antivirus on their mobile devices. They just didn't consider it. Stuff like that can easily affect businesses or even critical infrastructure operators.
Yeah. Can you tell us how governments and private entities collaborate to enhance the cybersecurity of national critical infrastructure?
As I mentioned before, but very quickly, most critical infrastructures are owned and operated by the private sector. In the United States, it's around 70-80%, and in the European Union, maybe 60-something%, even 70%, depending on the country. Because, of course, the list of critical infrastructures is not actually public for you to do an analysis. But this means that critical infrastructure protection is based on the cooperation between public and private. And you can have direct regulation of the critical infrastructure protection efforts. So you have, at the level of the European, a new directive on the resilience of critical entities. You have the Network and Information Systems 2 directive, so the next iteration that were approved last year. You have at the national level the legislation that covers this, but you also have cooperation in an operational sense. So the private entity knows if it's in the energy field, it knows that it has to report to the Ministry of Energy and maybe to the Ministry of Interior, depending on the country. It needs to report if they had a security incident, if somebody tried to attack them. They need to have an operator security plan by law, but they need to do it and to update it whenever the security situation changes. They need to have maybe not just a security department either buying services or implementing their own services for operational security. And my institute has its own security operations center mainly for state-owned operators of critical infrastructure. So we provide security services to them, including digital forensics and real-time protection. But you need to do all of those, and you need to also pass on information to the state that the state can then bring together. So this sort of cooperation takes place regardless of whether those entities are private or public or whatever. The point is that there are certain, let's say, challenges to working with private entities. Private entities are motivated by profit. For many of them, security is a cost to be minimized. Of course, they have compliance with the bare minimum required by the law, and they do not go above and beyond with their efforts. But at the same time, you have private entities that have a real security culture, including a cybersecurity culture, that view the cybersecurity of their systems as one of the main factors of attraction for their clients and something that justifies their market share, and they really do cooperate with the state and with other entities, for instance, in their field, when you have industry associations, in order to maximize their resilience. I keep using this word, resilience. It's the latest buzzword. People use it from environmental issues to psychological issues and, of course, in critical infrastructures. But for us in the critical infrastructure field, resilience is the ability of a system to prevent negative occurrences, so you are well protected, or if the negative event does happen, the impact is minimized, the damage is minimized, you return as quickly as possible to a minimum acceptable level of functioning, so you do not leave your customers in the dark for 2 days or without their services or without their products.
Or ERP.
And yes, and you also assimilate information from that incident in order to implement reforms so that you are more resilient, so that you are better prepared next time. And resilience is the main focus of all critical infrastructure protection activities.
Yeah, let's have a last question to you. It was a really nice pleasure to talk with you. Can you tell us about digital footprint? Can you tell us what are the risks associated with large digital footprint in terms of cyber threats or in terms of identity threat?
I think that One of the biggest issues that we are faced with is the cybersecurity culture, not just of the, let's say, of the leaders in our institutions or our companies or of the experts.
Let's just be sure, because we have only 1 more minute.
Basically, we have increased our digital footprint. We do not know how to manage it. We would personally be shocked if we found out how many information people can find about us online, either to be used in a criminal sense or to be abused in the sense of stalking, bullying. You have also the new technologies which can take your face, your voice, and use them for deep fakes. So the level of abuse to which normal people, but also important people, celebrities, political leaders, can be subjected to online is increasing constantly and is also growing faster than our capacity to handle it. And everybody has a responsibility, both to themselves, but also to their families, to their children, to try to manage the risks associated with our ever-expanding digital footprints.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a really nice pleasure to talk with you about the new digital age and a lot of things that can happen. My name is Marian Bănică. Our guest, it was Alexandru Georgescu from ICI Bucharest, the National Institute for Research and Development in Informatics in Bucharest. Thank you very much, and I hope that you enjoyed Science Hub.